the war room as the president is under assault 360 degrees. His administration as well under assault from all sides, from obstructionist Democrats to the president's own party, the left-wing national media, the deep state, you name it. It seems the president is targeted. Tonight, unnamed sources, most likely within the highest levels of the FBI, in my opinion, telling the New York Times that former Director James Comey now claims President Trump asked Comey to end what is now a 9-month-long investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The Times reports that Comey wrote a memo after meeting with the president in February. A memo that Comey apparently shared with some of his associates, writing that the president told him, quote, "I hope you can let this go." This according to an unnamed Comey associate who read parts of that memo to a Times reporter. The White House tonight denying outright the story, saying, quote, "The president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn." As to General Flynn, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates Sunday told Face the Nation that he thought it was a stretch to suggest, as many Dems have, that Flynn would have made himself vulnerable to Russian blackmail.
Having evidence that they didn't tell the truth to somebody in the same building where they work, maybe it's just the old intel guy, it's a problem. And it's a problem, like I just said, that I would tell the president about. But it's not the same as, and it's hard for me, I don't know General Flynn well, but it's hard for me to believe anybody would allow themselves to be blackmailed by the Russians because they didn't tell the full story or didn't tell the truth to the Vice President of the United States, who works 50 feet down the hall. You know, maybe he could have been blackmailed. It's theoretically possible. I just think it's a different kind of situation than we would have thought of in the intelligence business.
A different kind of situation, but it is now a situation that has been investigated for 9 months by the FBI. The FBI seems at a minimum to take 8 months and seldom reaches a conclusion. The New York Times report just the latest in a series of attacks against this president based on leaks from a deep state, in which many are obviously looking to subvert President Trump and his administration. The president earlier fired back over the leaks, tweeting this, quote, "I have been asking Director Comey and others from the beginning of my administration to find the leakers in the intelligence community." Obviously, to this point, so far, without much success. Joining me now for the latest on the deep state's attempts to subvert the presidency, the White House leaks, and much more, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer joining us tonight, Senior Fellow with the London Ctr for Policy Research. And Tony, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Lou.
Let's start with this, what appears to be a memo to file by the FBI director.
Right.
That conveys a one-person view of what happened in a conversation with at least one other person, the president. What do you make of this?
Well, further than that, Lou, let me read to you the article from MSNBC saying, neither NBC News nor The Times has seen the actual memo. Think about that. They're reporting that someone whispered to them about a memo that may or may not exist in somebody's file at the FBI. This is truly deep state, and you have collusion. I mean, this passes for reporting. This is beyond insane. And Lou, what you said here, walking up to it, I think illustrates clearly what the issue is regarding the president. The president did actually ask Mr. Comey to do something. And that thing he asked him to do was do your job, investigate the leaks. And instead of doing that and being asked by Trey Gowdy the same thing, expressing no interest at all in actually doing his job to investigate leaks, which, by the way, did compromise techniques and procedures of how we do collection. It was an arrogance about him that said, basically, I can pick and choose what I want to do. So this is another example of that, where you have people, and by the way, Lou, just between you and me, if you had something to say about someone, I don't think you'd be trying to go through your staff to say it. I think if you felt a certain way, you would tell that person. Why do we believe that James Comey would want this leaked out? I think that this is something being done by those in the deep state to upset everything that's going on, and like you said, try to undermine the president in every breath.
You know, and there is within this, I've been very critical of the White House communications team, and I think fairly and appropriately. I have to say that the White House is sitting there. That communications team has barely raised its head, let alone its voice collectively, to defend the president, to defend. I mean, I don't understand what they're doing for this president right now. Do you?
No, I don't. And this is where I think the criticism is apt by the fact that, first off, yesterday, I don't know what they were doing regarding the messaging regarding H.R. McMaster and that whole thing. And let's be clear on this. The president, for better or for worse, is the ultimate classification or declassification authority. He can talk to anybody about anything, no matter what the level is. And beyond that, I understand that things were instantly twisted by the National Security Council staff and leaked, obviously, to the Post. And there was a very delayed, very muted response, where they should have been right up there outlining the facts right up front about how this is completely false. So I think they, like you point out, the White House communication staff has to believe they are now at a state of war. This is war. It's called information operations, information warfare, and clearly the other side, the deep state and the Clinton folks, and I have to say some folks on the Republican side are all lining up. The battle lines are drawn, and it's time for people to understand how to deal with this as if like it's a war.
Yeah, and that's why I made reference to the war room.
Right.
This president famously called Jeb Bush low energy, and with that branded a person who you know, so effectively. But the fact is, this is a low energy communications department, and it needs to be as, well, hell, the White House needs to be as high energy in its entirety as our president.
Right.
I know
absolutely.
that's a very tough requirement and a high bar, but they've got to pick it up. Because when you are looking at this array of people in deep state, on Capitol Hill, on the left, on the rhinos on the right, you name it, the national left-wing media, you've got to counter that assault.
Right. And Lou, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to basically line it up, bring it up like it's a battle. And you got to figure out your order of battle. That's the technical term of figuring out who your troops are, figuring out who the bad guys are, and going about it that way. And frankly, you need to weigh into them. To use a term from General Patton, you know, you just got to do it. And this is where I think the president clearly understands what he's trying to do. Right. And I don't always believe that he has staff which is actually kind of rolling at his pace. And again, yesterday I cite for you kind of that whole debacle. And I'm sorry, you know, I don't know General McMaster, but I don't think he did much good the way he presented the counter argument. They've got to be much more precise. They've got to be better than the other side. And they just haven't got to that mark yet.
Yeah, and there's no question that the president has a bright and capable team, but they need to be, let's say, remotivated, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Focused a bit.
Right.
I want to turn just to one other aspect here as we consider it. You know, I look around and I see the great cabinet this president has put together. I look over at the intelligence agencies that are now led by just absolutely superior people. The deep state is committed to maintaining this assault, it seems. I mean, we're not even 4 months into the Trump presidency, and the assaults continue, the attacks continue, and we have, as you indicated at the outset, the New York Times and the Washington Post, these are no longer fake news. I mean, they are, it's an entire psyops. It is a disinformation campaign from previous, former journalists. What do you think, having some experience with all of the above, would be an appropriate response by this White House?
Well, two things. First, you're completely correct on the papers. I mean, this is they become Pravda, just to use a Cold War metaphor, and it's shameful. Secondly, regarding the very fact, and look, I've met with senior intelligence officials now in place, and Lou, they have to go through and sort out who is going to be actual career people who are going to do their job and those who are loyal to the previous administration. And some of these folks have transitioned from what we call political appointee jobs into career jobs. So you got to go through. My recommendation, I'll tell you what I said, you need to go fire two levels down. Everybody below you 2 levels, fire them. Be done with it. Thank you for your service to America. It's time for you to find a new job. And then start looking for people who are going to be loyal to the American people and to the policies of this president. That's what you've got to do. It's just that simple.
Very quick, if you will, your best one-word answer. Should this president reasonably expect that his intelligence agencies and staff should be able to find leakers in quick order who are, frankly, sharing classified information with the, at the very least, the national left-wing media that are then hammering that into a spear that's thrown against him?
Right. The answer is yes. And let me explain in just a handful of words.
Okay, half a word?
Well, look, you need to fire the people and then do a real investigation. Now that Comey's gone, Lou, he has the ability to appoint someone who can actually do real leak investigations. That's what he should immediately do. And it ain't that hard. You can find these people. If I was in charge, I'd find these people in less than 2 weeks.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, you might send a note to the White House, either with your own thoughts or suggesting those of someone else.
Well, thank you, Lou. Well, you too.
You've got it. Tony Shaffer, thanks.
Thank you,
coming
sir.
right back. Much more straight ahead as we take up the assaults on the Trump presidency. It's that straightforward. Explosive new developments tonight in the murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich, who was murdered last summer. A federal investigator telling Fox News that an FBI forensic report of Rich's computer showed he made contact with WikiLeaks through a former reporter and London-based WikiLeaks director, Gavin McFadden. The investigator told Fox News Rich provided McFadden with more than 44,000 emails, nearly 18,000 attachments. Rich was murdered near his D.C. home on the morning of July 10th. But his wallet, his cell phone, his watch not taken. WikiLeaks 12 days later published internal emails showing top DNC officials trading ideas on how to hurt Senator Bernie Sanders at the polls, and those emails resulting in the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the chair of the DNC, and the DNC's 3 top officials because of the obvious conclusion portrayed in those emails between the DNC and the Clinton campaign. Rich's contact with WikiLeaks, corroborated by private investigator and former D.C. detective Rod Wheeler, who was hired by a third party to investigate this case. A Rich family spokesman claiming the report is unsubstantiating and added, quote, "Even if tomorrow an email was found, it is not a high enough bar of evidence to prove any interactions, as emails can be altered, and we've seen that those interested in pushing conspiracies will stop at nothing to do so." Those are the words of the family spokesperson, who is also a Democratic crisis management and public relations expert. My next guest is investigating the murder of Seth Rich. He says there is some degree of exchange between Rich and WikiLeaks that occurred before his death. And joining me now with the latest, the man hired to investigate the case by a third party. Rod Wheeler joins us, former D.C. detective, Fox News contributor. And Rod, good to have you with us. And I know this is a complicated case. I want to say first to the family who have expressed concerns about the evidence here and what it actually means, that we're being very sensitive to this, but we're also looking at this case in the public interest, in fact, in the national interest, to try to discern what the D.C. Metropolitan Police and the FBI have not been able to do to this point, and we're going to do so with every sensitivity that we can bring to their concerns, with every effort also to get ultimately to the truth, which I know the family must desperately seek. Rod, this federal investigator, we're in an unusual situation. An FBI forensic report showing 44,000 emails, 18,000 attachments. That approximates just about what was released by WikiLeaks through the campaign and leading up to the election itself last summer. Do you think that's a coincidence?
Well, no, I actually don't think it's a coincidence, but I do want to emphasize, first off here, Lou, that I have never seen the emails themselves. The information that I have gotten is information that has come through Fox News from that federal investigator, and then what I've done is taken that information to try to corroborate it. Because what we want to do whenever we have a source, as you well know, we always like to check on the credibility of that information coming in.
What have you found in that regard?
Well, what I have found is that his information that he shared with Fox News is pretty consistent with everything else that I've been learning, including the fact that right now no one seems to know where the computers are that belong to Seth Rich. The computers obviously were confiscated at some point. The police department tells me they don't know where they are. The FBI says they're not involved. So my question is, well, who has the computers?
Yeah, who has a computer and why? First, as the primary investigative department, why doesn't the D.C. Metropolitan Police know where evidence is? And if there was a forensic, and there has been a forensic report created by the FBI, why don't the investigating detectives know where it is, what's in those emails, how many there are? We have a very precise number from that federal investigator, but none of this explains why the FBI is involved and why there are claims that the D.C. detectives were told to stand down.
Right, and that's a claim that I actually heard myself from a detective who said, Rod, we were told not to investigate this fully. Now, see, that's interesting because that's consistent with what this federal investigator said. The federal investigator never knew, Lou, that I had heard from a detective in the police department to stand down. Well, if this guy says the same thing, you have to start saying to yourself, well, maybe there's some truth behind this. So that's why I think when you look at the totality of everything that we have right now, it's very consistent with what this federal investigator has said. Now, I don't think that the police department has intentionally covered up anything pertaining to this case. I think it comes from someone above the police department. That's just my sense, Lou.
And we should point out the mayor herself denying that she issued any kind of stand-down order, as described, obviously, by some of those within the department. But again, we don't have an explanation why Washington, D.C. seems to be where investigations go to die, whether they originate with the federal government or the D.C. Metropolitan Police. This is a strange, again, unresolved investigation with obvious frustration on the part of the local detectives who have this case in their hands, as well as the federal authorities, again, without explanation about why federal authorities are involved here.
That's right. And no one has been able to give us any adequate explanation as to why the feds would be involved. I think the feds are involved, and I think there's a lot more information that's going to come out with regards to this case. But I do want to say that the Rich family is very concerned about this. The Rich family believes it was still a botched street robbery, which it could have been. So I want to make sure that that's clear. We don't know who or why Seth ended up dead.
We haven't been able to determine, perhaps you have, that there were any murders in that neighborhood at all in recent years. So
well, the last murder occurred in 2010, Lou. Right. 2010.
So this is quite an exception, particularly in a city that is broadly as violent as Washington and deadly as Washington, D.C. is. And there seems to be a quick reflex here to say, you know, this was it was a robbery on the part of the police department. Obviously, it was not, because nothing was taken from Seth Rich. He was alive for 2 hours. We have no record that a single police officer or detective asked him who shot you. It is a peculiar case from start to finish. Your thoughts as we wrap up here about where we're headed now.
Right. Just to go along with that real quickly, we also don't have body cameras that I know the police officers were wearing on the scene the night in which Seth was killed. That's a problem because we know for a fact those officers had on body cameras. No one knows where the video is. I think we're going to have to continue to look at this case, and hopefully more will come out as the days go by, Lou.
Rod Wheeler, thank you for being with us. We appreciate your time and your thoughts about this case that disturbs the entire country. Be sure to vote in. Thank you, Rod. Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. The question is, do you believe President Trump needs to accelerate his timetable for draining the swamp? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And on Wall Street, stocks finishing little change. The Dow and S&P down 2 points on the day. The Nasdaq rose another 20 points. Yes, it's at a new record high tonight. Volume on the big board, 3.3 billion shares. Industrial production also rose last month. Industrial production up 1%. That's the biggest increase in more than 3 years. Ford planning to cut 10% of its global workforce in an effort to improve profitability. More than half of the automaker's 200,000 workers are employed in North America. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Up next, the Trump administration under assault from the left-wing national media, battling leaks after leaks after leaks since day one of the Trump presidency.
Papers are being leaked, things are being leaked. It's criminal action, criminal act, and it's been going on for a long time before me, but now it's really going on.
And that's the subject of my commentary here next. And the field of candidates to replace FBI Director Comey getting, well, a lot smaller. We'll tell you who's taken themselves out of contention and who is pressing for the job. We'll have that and much more straight ahead. Stay with us, please. A few thoughts now in the communications room in the Trump White House. The concerted attacks now from all sides, the left-wing media, the Dems, weak-kneed Republicans, the latest feeding frenzy sparked by leaks in the Washington Post concerning whether Trump released classified information to the Russian foreign minister and ambassador, a story curiously released at the same time Mr. Trump is about to begin his first foreign trip as president Friday. The fact is, President Trump has the right as the chief executive to declassify information if that's what he chooses to do. The president was talking about intel that Israel developed regarding threats from the Islamic State, Israel issuing this statement. Israel has full confidence in our intelligence sharing relationship with the United States and looks forward to deepening that relationship in the years ahead under President Trump. But the Washington Post revels in its unreality, celebrating in the newsroom the number of hits its attack on the president received online. And the Trump administration has a communications department behaving as though they were in the George W. Bush White House. Our president is under constant barrage from all quarters by the vapid but still venomous Dems on Capitol Hill, the left-wing national media, the toxic GOP elites, and much of the orthodoxy who hate almost as much as the left and the deep state denizens that includes some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in this nation. And this president deserves the full commitment of his White House staff, who should be fighting as hard as the president for him, his agenda, and this country. The all too civil, low-energy Trump White House communications team remains flat-footed and failing. They need to change that. They aren't obviously fighters. They obviously aren't street smart, and they haven't been strategic. And they must change all of that. They must become all of that and much more, because the determined forces of evil that surround this White House are trying to destroy the Trump presidency and will settle, it appears, for nothing less This is a war, damn it. So get to war. Our quotation of the evening on war from Sun Tzu, who said of those who would win, "Know thyself, know thy enemy, 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories." Begin, please. We're coming right back. Stay with us. Joining me now to discuss the leaks, the deep state, and how the White House is fighting back or not fighting back. Veteran of 10 presidential campaigns, Republican strategist, Fox News contributor, the Dean, Ed Rollins. Great to have you with us, Ed.
Thank you.
Let's start with what we just reported on Seth Rich and that frustrating inability, it seems, to get any kind of closure for the Seth, the family, for anyone that is concerned about this country and the relationship to the DNC itself.
We begin with the motive, and the motive obviously is this was someone who took 40,000 documents out of the DNC and gave it to WikiLeaks. He's murdered in the middle of the night. That's a pretty straight line for most law enforcement to go find that and look for the evidence. To basically try and say it's a street crime, some guy stumbling out of a bar and gets murdered, where there's been no murders in that neighborhood. My sense is that this should be a big investigation, should continue, and I think at the end of the day, you'll find some other facts than they have today.
The fellow Bauman, who is speaking for the family, he is connected to the Democratic Party. He's doing pro bono work, but nonetheless, you have now a partisan shroud around the family. You have an investigation that is going nowhere. The department admits that, and the FBI investigator is the one who has a specific number. 44,053 emails that were transferred from his computer to WikiLeaks. And guess what? The police department, the federal investigator, none of them know where that computer is.
Well, it's outrageous, and I think at the end of the day, it needs to keep moving forward and for some justice here.
I want to turn to, if I may, the Jim Comey thing. In the New York Times, a letter to file that apparently he shared with associates, which they read to a reporter or two reporters. Nobody's seen it. No one has. And the White House outright denies it.
And they right at 5 o'clock, just as they did the stories last night at 5 o'clock. This is an orchestration. I think the end of the day here, they see this president on the ropes in his early stages of his presidency. He has a terrible team to fight back. They need to get into a
What do you think of the communications team?
I think what communications operation? There's a TV series called Scandal. It's kind of a fictitious show. But any of these crises, I've done this for 25 years. Crisis management is where you basically take charge and you figure out what's coming at you. You sit down and you lay out what your story is. They're getting fired at from 15 different people at 15 different times. And I think at the end of the day, you got to round up your troops. Every Democrat was out there today beating the daylights out of this president. There were no Republicans out there defending him. You and a few people around here are the only ones defending him. And I think it's ridiculous. It's just. This is a president who has a very big week going abroad. That's a very important thing to this country. His presidency is very important to this country. And basically, he's getting nickeled and dimed and beat to death by his own staff. If I knew what they were doing in that White House today, I'd put a lie detector test on every single one of them. And I'd say, you want to stay in this White House, you put your hand on the machine here and you tell me whether you've been leaking and who you've been leaking to. Because this is right out of the White House. This document came right out of the White House.
And it's got to stop. It's got to stop.
It just doesn't.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I think back over, you've seen these White Houses under every Republican
first one I lived through was the Nixon Watergate thing, and I watched this drip, 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 and I think to a certain extent you're supposed to have learned the lessons from that one, and obviously this is a totally different situation, but they have this guy on the run. He's tough and he won't go away, but he needs a team around him to basically punch back.
Yeah. To me, it's inconceivable that whoever is running that communications department is so faint of heart and obviously not street smart, not tough, not experienced, and I just can't.
There are two modern White Houses that were disasters in the beginning. One was Jimmy Carter's. The second was Bill Clinton's. George W. Bush's wasn't very good. They straightened it out. They worked it out, and they need to straighten this one out real quick.
Straight away. Ed Rollins.
Thank you.
Good to see you, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Joining me now to discuss the deep state and all of the attacks against the Trump White House, Congressman Ron Estes. He was sworn last month after winning a special election to fill CIA Director Mike Pompeo's seat, and it's great to have you with us, Congressman, and congratulations.
Thank you, Lou.
This has got to be quite an experience for you. Let me get a sense of your impressions of this White House, this president, under a full 360-degree attack from all quarters.
Well, it's kind of amazing, when you take over the responsibility of the president, the way he's doing is you've got to give him some latitude to get his job done. And, not everybody in the country voted for him. We recognize that. But, we should be supporting him and help him work through some of these issues that there's some monumental things that we need to address here in the country.
What are your impressions when you see a senator like John McCain, a veteran, obviously Senator Bob Corker talking about the White House is in a downward spiral, and McCain says he's deeply troubled by it all. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not sure what's driving some of those comments. Obviously, there's a lot of work that has to be done at the White House, and we as Republicans, I think we should be supporting the president and helping work through those issues and helping address those. And I have not heard all of those comments that you made mention to, but we need to make sure we help make sure the president's successful and our country's successful.
Yeah, isn't that a fascinating idea that the country pull for the president to lead the nation to prosperity, to lead the country toward a brighter future, and you would think that people could get behind that idea, but people in his own party. I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk with you, Congressman, and I got to say, I think you just raised the loyalty and the, if I may say, the patriotic average in the Congress, and it's great to have you on the show. I hope you'll come back often.
Well, great, thank you. I think we saw it in the November election, and I saw it as well in my special election, that people wanted things to be done here differently in Washington, and so we want to make sure that we get some positive things done, and that we get some things accomplished now that we have Republican majorities in the House and the Senate and in the White House. Absolutely.
This president won by vowing to change the status quo, but the status quo is awful stubborn and just a little mean. Congressman, good to have you with us. Ron Estes, again, congratulations, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Lou.
You bet. Thank you. New evidence tonight suggesting North Korea may be behind that massive cyber attack, that global attack, that affected 150 countries. Samatek and Kaspersky Labs saying some of the code used in the attack has also been used in programs run by North Korea's linked Lazarus Group that was behind the infamous Sony attack a few years ago. Up next here, the man who received a standing ovation from President Trump.
Pratt Industries is the largest Australian employer in America, having invested $2.5 billion to create 7,000 high-paying manufacturing jobs for Americans over the last 30 years.
Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt joins me here next on why he's praising Mr. Trump and Mr. Trump's fair trade plans. We talk here in just a moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back. In our online poll, we ask you, do you believe it's impossible now to get a fair trial in this hyper-partisan age? And 71% of you say, yes, it is impossible. Well, joining us tonight, billionaire Australian businessman Anthony Pratt, who pledged a $2 billion investment in this country, the executive chairman of recycling and cardboard box giant BC Industries, saying his goal is to double America's food production industry, create millions of new high-paying American jobs. And joining me now to talk about that investment and much more, Pratt Industries Global Chairman Anthony Pratt. Anthony, great to have you.
Thanks, Lou.
And it's inspiring to see you make that kind of a commitment to the country, and it's a great example for business leaders, domestic and foreign.
Thank you. No, it was a great honour before the President and the First Lady to announce that because of his leadership, we're investing $2 billion to create 5,000 high-paying manufacturing jobs, mainly in the Midwest.
And the President giving you a standing ovation, well earned and richly paid there. It's, you know, when I look at what is happening here and I compare, I just love to know what you're thinking of what Donald Trump is going through as president right now, also a businessman, but now suddenly in an arena that I don't think even he could have anticipated.
Well, we're very enthused about President Trump. We think that he's doing a fantastic job. I mean, the jobs data that came out about a week ago showing that unemployment's at its lowest rate in over a decade. The fact that that great trade deal with China was done just last Thursday night or Thursday, showing that we're going to get beef into China for the first time since 2003. He's doing a brilliant job, and that's why we're doubling down on our investment in America.
And as you watch what is happening politically, the politics in Australia are a little different than what we are going through here now. But even in the best of years, the United States is a rough place, and this is rough and ready. What do you think President Trump should do to disarm and to neutralize, if you will, his opponents and fervent critics?
Well, he's doing a fantastic job at what he's doing, and some of those results that I just talked about, I actually think that there's enormous, people used to talk about people going offshore to manufacture in China. I think there's onshoring going on now, and I think that companies are coming back from China to places like Ohio because of President Trump, because of the great energy cost, low energy costs in America, and the productivity of Americans is the best in the world.
I have to tell you, I'm a bit surprised that even his harshest critics, I would have thought, would acknowledge what has happened to our stock market since his election from November 9th through. The market is up just about 14% on the Dow. We're talking about trillions of dollars in market cap. We're watching jobs being created. And the partisanship is so fervent that they will not even acknowledge, and the national left-wing media will not permit that message to get through, how much better the country is in these few short months.
That's right. I mean, speaking anecdotally, I had a bet, actually, during the election that President Trump was going to win the election because I didn't think anyone would believe me afterwards that I predicted. And the reason that I came to that conclusion was that I talked to our people in the South, East, the Southwest, the Midwest, and the words that were coming back to me were that they were all going to vote for then Mr. Trump, now President Trump. So, all our 68 factories, we employ 7,000 people here, are all in those regions.
Right.
And the word you get back from those is very different to,
So like President Trump, you don't worry too much about the polls. And he makes a point. Those polls were wrong before, and suddenly somebody writes an article about them now as if they're right. It's still the same nonsense and the same cant bias in the polling.
Exactly. Now I believe he's doing a brilliant job. I think he's a brilliant man, one of the great leaders of our generation. I think that he will definitely get a second term, and I really think that his outcomes continue to show.
Absolutely. Anthony, I've got to ask you, how much was that bet?
Was a $100,000 bet.
I think that's a nice return, and,
yeah.
And good on you. Anthony Pratt, great to have you here.
Thank you, Lou.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Again, thanks for putting your money where your heart and your expectations are.
It's a great honor.
Thank you. That's it for us tonight. We thank you for being with us. Congressman Jim Jordan, Senator Luther Strange, among my guests here tomorrow. Please be with us. Thanks for joining us tonight. Good night from New York.